Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. Oh my goodness, I can't just say that. I have to say Happy New Year.
It is 2018.
It is 2018, and I am glad about it. I am glad to be here. You are listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We are back. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan. Joining me is my good friend, my confidant, Mr. David Seaton. How are you, sir?
Enjoying being in 2018. Looking forward to a good year.
Absolutely. Same here, my friend. Same here.
Can't wait till November.
Yes. You talking about midterms?
I'm talking about the midterms of 2018.
All right. I thought you were talking about my birthday for a minute. I got excited. Whatever.
It'll be a dual reason to celebrate.
Well, hey, hopefully for my birthday, I can get a nice blue wave going through Congress.
Looking forward to
that. That would be the perfect birthday gift. So we are here in Chicago to talk about the latest happenings. I wanted to do kind of something to kind of wrap up 2017. If we have time, we can kind of go through that. But we're going to push forward today, and we're going to talk about the future. We're going to talk about 2018, and there is a lot to talk about, good people. First of all, what are we missing? We want to thank everyone that's watching us on Facebook Live, everyone listening on YouTube, IntellectualRadio.com, iHeartRadio, whatever medium you found yourself on. We thank you for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. We want to also the show. Anyone that's watching it on Facebook Live, feel free to share the show. Of course, we're going to do our best in 2018 to bring you the best of information that's out there. We are always looking to be the voice for the voiceless here at Humanity in the Headlines. So, Dave, what talk about today?
I guess we have to talk about that book that got released by Michael Wolff.
There was a book?
A book about Donald Trump and the Trump administration.
I must have missed that.
Did you miss it?
I missed it.
Oh, it was all the rage on the news.
What is it about?
It's about the dysfunction in the Trump White House.
It must be a short book.
That's pretty long. It's pretty long. Not as long as it could be, but
dysfunction in the Trump White House. What is it, like half a page? What is this? No, we certainly will be discussing the book written by Mr. Michael Wolff, Fire and Fury. We've got some of the top quotes from the book, and we're going to break it down. Joining us for that conversation will be none other than Mr. Clarence Page. I know that's one of your favorite guests. He's been on with us before. You've seen him on MSNBC. He's a contributor to them, and he writes for
Chicago
just about
Tribune.
For the Tribune, and he contributes to just about everybody. So he's going to be joining us today. That's always an insightful conversation. Later in the show, we're going to talk about, and this is a really important segment we have later in the show, we're going to talk about some of these Obama-era rollbacks that are being done by the Trump administration. And because this is the kind of things that are going on while we're talking about all this drama in the White House, while we're talking about what Steve Bannon said and what Trump said. There are some very serious things happening in the background, especially through our Justice Department, through Mr. Jeff Sessions, Beauregard, and certainly being done through just about every government area you can imagine that Trump has assigned all of these inept people that are usually anti the stance of the office that they're running. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got to let you know how these Obama era rollbacks, the things that he's rolling back simply because the name Obama was attached to it, and how these things will affect you.
And specifically, we're going to be talking about the rollback of
marijuana.
And the reason why I wanted to put that out there is
marijuana protections that have been in place.
Right. Under the Obama administration, Eric Holder and President Barack Obama decided not to prosecute people at the federal level. And the reason why it's really important is because this week, since the first of this year, we've had two more states legalize recreational marijuana. That would be California and Vermont.
Yeah, this just our state with the biggest economy in the country.
Sixth biggest economy in the world.
Thank you. So, we got a lot to talk about. I'm really excited to be here. Really excited to be back. I hope you guys missed us. We missed you. What you got, Dave?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, quick disclaimer. The story about the marijuana, whatever side you fall down on it, we're not here to endorsing the use of marijuana or making any moral judgment, but we are going to have a conversation about the politics of it and how it adversely impacts one community over the others.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, you're looking at two people here, David and myself, that have never smoked. I've never smoked a joint in my life, and again, I don't. This it's not to say that I'm against it or for it. It's not even about that. It's just about it doesn't make any sense at all, and we're going to make the case for it later today. So you're certainly welcome to join the conversation. You're welcome to give us a call at 708-223-8953. So again, feel free to give a call. We have, the lines will be open later in the show. And again, feel free to comment and ask questions on Facebook Live. We'd love to answer them in real time and be a part of the conversation today. So thank you so much for joining us on Humanity in the Headlines. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be speaking with none other than Mr. Clarence Page. We'll be right back on Humanity in the Headlines. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. So, Dave, you were telling me something about this book that came out the other day?
Apparently, there was a book that was published earlier this week. And it is really important to. This is an important point, and I would love to hear a Clarence Page comment on this. Earlier this week, the book got kind of pre-released to some people in the media, and Donald Trump directed his personal attorney to send a cease and desist to the author and the publisher of the book, because he didn't want this book coming out with all of these negative characterizations of the White House. I think it's really, really important that we remember that when the president does something like that from 1600 Pennsylvania, that he is stepping on people's First Amendment rights. So this isn't Donald Trump behaving as a private citizen and saying he's going to sue some magazine for writing a negative article about him. He's doing this in his capacity as the president of the United States. And that's one of the real dangers of having a dilettante in the White House, someone who doesn't understand the Constitution.
Absolutely. So joining us, as David just alluded, is Mr. Clarence Page, MSNBC contributor, writer for the Chicago Tribune. He's joining us today, and we thank him so much for his time. How are you today, Mr. Page?
Well, we're cold here in Washington. Probably not as cold as you are.
I was about to say, who you talking to?
we're down to about 12 degrees here, so everybody's panicking.
How about negative 12 here, my friend? That's not
Thank you. That's not more like it. That's
yes,
right.
That's not even the wind chill. But
yeah, we're going to have January get real cold.
we are expecting a heat wave here in Chicago to a blistering 34 degrees tomorrow.
Right.
So,
hey, but let's be grateful that we're not up there, and I believe it was in Vermont or New Hampshire. It was Mount something up there that got a wind chill of -100.
Right. Isn't that incredible?
That's incredible.
I won't tell you a whole bunch of blizzard stories, but that reminds me of when I was working for WBBM TV back in the early 80s, and it got down to -65 chill factor one night, and our satellite truck froze.
Oh, wow.
Chicago police rescued us. But,
oh, goodness.
Well, the city is made from stories like that, but Chicago folks are tough folks, right?
You got it. You got it. So, again, we thank you. Let's go ahead and get right to David's first point to talk about the cease and desist letter that was forwarded to the publisher and the writer of the book from the White House.
Yeah, I wouldn't pay a lot of attention to that, only because you're absolutely right. It is unconstitutional. Everybody knows that. Trump is trying to exercise what's called prior restraint, which means stop somebody before they have published something that you don't like. It's very difficult to get that unless there's some kind of a personal damage that's been done to you, like libel or slander. But Trump isn't likely to make that case, and it really doesn't matter because I haven't checked Amazon here in the last few minutes, but the book is a runaway bestseller, partly because Donald Trump's making a big deal about it. The thing about dilettantes, as you mentioned earlier, is people with more experience at politics and offices like this know the best way to handle an expose sensationalist book like this is to ignore it best you can. Trump can't ignore anything that strikes him as a personal affront. So he has to come back fighting with opening up both barrels and making a big deal out of it. Just this morning, he had a whole Twitter storm of tweets talking about how brilliant he is and other bits of self praise in order to counter this book by Michael Wolff.
Well, speaking of personal affronts, Mr. Page, I'm so glad you used that phrasing. I'm looking here at an article written in Yahoo, 10 things that we need to know about the book. And one of the things that they talk about is Rupert Murdoch describing Trump as an effing moron. Now, the whole point, not the whole point, but one of the major points of the book, it appears, is that the people around him, closest to him, do not believe in his ability as an intelligent person, certainly as someone who is fit for the office. And that seems to be a theme over and over again. It's not just the people on the outside or what they like to call the mainstream media. What do you make of it that that a lot of these quotes, be it from Rupert Murdoch, be it from Gary Cohn, be it from General McMaster, Rex Tillerson, what does it?
Joe Bannon. I mean, not Joe Bannon. I mean,
and
Steve Bannon.
and most recently Steve Bannon. What do you make of the fact that the people closest to him have such a low opinion of him, and what does it say about their willingness to support him in spite of?
Well, first of all, personally, I think they're excellent judges of character. Number two, the thing about Murdoch's quote is, that's the same thing that Trump's own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, reportedly said about Trump, effing moron.
Verbatim.
And Tillerson never actually denied it straight out. He, when he was asked about it, he mumbled this and that, but he never actually denied having said it. But I think it's important because with the entire book here, Michael Wolff, among journalists, has a mixed reputation. He's known for mixing in speculation with fact, and sometimes going with quotes that may not be totally accurate, or maybe partly or maybe unconfirmed. But he's a writer who writes good page turners. He keeps you turning the page, and this book is another example of it. And it's the kind of a book that, even if it is inaccurate in some ways, the quotes are remarkably, strikingly accurate as far as anyone can tell so far. And the main thing is that they sound accurate. And why do they sound accurate? Because most of, I'd say, judging by the polls, most Americans don't have the highest of regard for Donald Trump's qualifications. Everybody talks about his base all the time, but his base is only between 32 and 37% of the electorate, depending on which poll you look at. Even Fox News poll has dropped him below 40%. And so he is constantly on the defensive about the fact that he didn't win office by a majority. The book says that Trump didn't expect to win. Plans to not win the vote, but in his way to come out a winner anyhow. And I tell you, I don't know if you saw Donald Trump on live TV that night when he came out after his victory had been announced. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights.
He did.
He was looking around like, what do I do now? And according to Wolff's book, that's exactly the way he felt. He was stunned by his own victory, and his wife Melania cried, and believe me, looked like she was crying on the day of the inauguration, which is the way Michael Wolff describes her unpleasant state of mind at the time. And so, in a way, we all know about Donald Trump's terrible record for telling the truth. There's somewhere over 200 documented lies that
2,000
have been gathered so far in the last year of his presidency, or I should say the first year. In a way, now he's getting a taste of his own medicine, because here, even if there are falsehoods in the book, people tend to think that they sound true. And that's how he's gotten away with so many lies in the past himself, by saying things that sound true to his base.
Yeah, much like the Gorilla TV story, right? I said much like the Gorilla TV story, correct?
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
I said much like the Gorilla TV story.
Yeah, I think so. It really is Donald Trump views his whole presidency as a TV show. The New York Times quoted him as saying shortly after he won, and I guess it was before his inauguration, talking to the White House staff, he said that look upon this presidency every day as a TV program in which the central figure is a good guy fighting the good fight against bad guys every day. That's not a direct quote, but that's essentially what he said. And with that quote, and that's from the New York Times, and has apparently been confirmed, he really expressed what I have been saying about his presidency all along. He's a reality TV star who is playing president as if it were a reality TV show, and every day you got more drama.
You mentioned him tweeting this morning. This is David, and I brought his Twitter feed up, and I had it up, and you went there before I got the opportunity to say it.
Right, I try to be ahead of the news.
Well, in one of the tweets that he did, he had this 3-part tweet that's timestamped 6 hours ago, where he says, "Actually, throughout my life, my 2 greatest assets have been mental stability and being really smart."
Right.
Now, I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she's pretty articulate, but there was a time earlier when she was preteen in her early teens where she used the word "like" a lot.
Yep.
And I used to say to her, "You sound like a Valley girl." Now, she was too young to know what I was talking about. But if you remember the movies from the 80s, the stereotype of young Caucasian girls that grew up in the Malibu Valley or grew up in California, that they would always say the word "like." And unfortunately,
yep,
when I read Donald Trump now, that's the voice I hear. I hear him saying, "I'm like really smart. Like I'm just that's what I hear."
Yep.
It's amazing that if you have that kind of context or that kind of history, you essentially can't discern or make a distinction between a 72-year-old president of the biggest and most powerful country in history and the stereotype of young Caucasian teenage girls who live in the Valley.
Yeah, I had the very same reaction when I saw that tweet this morning, and I also thought that it sounded like this was dictated. Though usually his tweets sound like he's sitting on the morning throne and tapping away with his thumbs. But this one, the punctuation was perfect and all of this. It sounded like he was dictating it to somebody who was typing those words in and just left the like in and that sort of thing. But the main thing is that I think I know a lot of Americans feel the same way when they hear Donald Trump talk. He's basically a building developer from Queens, and he talks like that. He always talks in superlatives.
Right.
Something can't just be nice. It's got to be the greatest on the planet. You're going to love this. This is a guy who would take you out to a vacant lot and say, "It's not much now, but a year from now, imagine there's going to be a $14 million building right here. It's going to have the finest architect on the planet that's going to design it. It's going to have the most wonderful woodwork and blah, 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 blah." And within minutes, he's got you imagining this building. You're going to see that building, and you're going to want that building if he's doing his job. And that was how he ran for president. The coastal elites, as the Republicans call them now, the folks East and West Coast and Illinois, the third coast, in my view, didn't vote for Trump, but those folks in between in that red heartland did, and Hillary Clinton didn't stop him quickly enough, especially in states that she should have won, like Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and what am I missing? Iowa
Wisconsin.
and Minnesota.
Right.
Those states there in the Midwest that she should have won, and Trump managed to pull it off because of that salesmanship with folks who thought he sounded good. And that's really what a politician sets out to do when they run for office, is to sound good, connect with the voters. And Trump pulled that off. But he had no thoughts at all to how he's going to handle the presidency. That's the impression I get watching him day to day. And that's what this book tends to back that up. Whether it's 100% accurate or not, it's got enough of the spirit of the truth. So just like when Donald Trump talks about how I would have won if it hadn't been for 4 million votes, 4 million illegal aliens voting on election day. I mean, he just made that up on the spur of the moment, right? But there are people who quote that back to me when I go and argue with them about how Donald Trump is unqualified. And the same thing with all that he's done in the last year as president. His own supporters, his hardcore supporters, believe he's done a lot. They think he's already built a wall between here and Mexico, and a whole slew of accomplishments that he hasn't really achieved. But he talks a good game.
And it's interesting that I like that you use the word superlative, because to your point, everything is the biggest. Everything, you know, the tax cuts are the biggest in history. We've rolled back more regulations than any president in any administration in history. And everything is like you said, the superlative. But and to your point, that's probably, I would attribute that to a large degree how he was able to win some of those blue states and some of those states in the Rust Belt that everyone assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win. But my question is, ultimately, that's setting him up for rule number one in sales, is that you don't overpromise and underdeliver. So when you tell people, hey, we're going to do these tax cuts and you're going to pull, I remember he said, when we pass this tax plan, you're going to open up the paper and look in the want ads, and you're going to see you're going to be turning down jobs and trying to decide which job you want, which again dated him when he said you open up the want ads. That just cracked me up when he said that. But again, everything he's saying, he's overpromising and underdelivering, and eventually that's going to catch up with him when you couple that with the fact that his supporting cast doesn't believe that he has the minimum cognitive ability to function in the job.
Yeah, well, there's also a third rule that Donald Trump observes, which is ignore any promise that's not made in writing. And that includes all of his IOUs that are out there to contractors who did the work and then didn't get paid by Trump, and their numbers are legion. And it's the same thing now as president. There are people who feel like they're not getting paid, so to speak. He keeps forgetting the forgotten Americans that he promised he was going to take care of, and that's what we have elections for. But he does indeed promise a lot, doesn't always deliver. But now the folks who voted for him take it rather personally when you suggest to them that they made a mistake. I hear from them all the time, and so do my colleagues. And I think that's really why he's still got that 32 to 37% base left, because a lot of them are very defensive about him now, and they want to protect him, much like Barack Obama's supporters wanted to protect him after he got in and received such brutal backlash from white conservatives.
Mr. Page, this is Atiba. Let me tell you what my bottom line concern about this whole book is, and you let me know where I'm wrong.
Sure.
This is my concern. Michael Wolff came into the White House and basically had access to the president, as I understand it, through Steve Bannon, but he basically sweet-talked his way into the White House, and then Trump was blindsided by this book. I mean, this isn't a guy that wrote this book outside of the White House. Right. He was in the White House every day. And so here's my concern is, all it takes to get next to this president is to give him fake praise. All you have to do is make him think you're going to give him praise to get access to him. And then once you have that access, he can be duped into pretty much anything.
That's right.
And that is my concern, is that this is a gentleman, Michael Wolff, who was in the White House every day, who had access, who has real quotes from real people that are very next to the president, that are his closest advisors. And the president himself didn't see this coming. That in and of itself is a huge, because what happens when world leaders use this same tactic to get next to him? Putin is already doing this. So that is my biggest concern with this, is that we have a president who's caught with his pants down in something that he should have seen coming.
Yeah, and not just Putin. We know through sources that the president of China has not just him, but the leadership in China has had their own memos and conversations about how to handle Trump. And number one is praise him and flatter him, and it'll open up doors for you. And we've seen this happen. Now, when he went over to China, they gave him a bigger reception than they gave Richard Nixon. And Nixon was the first to open the doors to China. Some of us are old enough to remember back in the 70s. But they've gotten the word, and so did France and England. You notice when he went over to France, they laid out the biggest parade that they could, and Trump responded saying, "I'd like to have one of those in the U.S." And he tried to have a military a parade with
at the inauguration,
tanks and artillery and all rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue on inauguration day, but he was blocked by folks who said that's going to tear up the streets, which it would. But this is the world already knows that if you want to get to Donald Trump, flatter him. He sends that signal out every day. And what did he do this morning? As we've been talking about, he had this sharp attack coming from this book. And how does he respond? He goes on Twitter and starts talking about, "I'm really smart. I'm really, really smart." And boy, I'm just what do you call it? A steady genius or stable genius. That's it. That's a good new nickname for Donald Trump, stable genius. But he has a very high view of himself, and he wants everybody else to share that view, so he can't stop talking about it.
And ultimately, I guess that's really the biggest problem, because to your point, he has that support of the 32 to 37% of his base that are in his corner, and they are incontrovertible in their positive views of him. But at the end of the day, what caused him to win the election is that there were just enough people in the middle that were on the fence between Donald Trump and between Hillary Clinton, and they decided at the last moment to go with Donald Trump because they wanted to roll the dice, because he was making all of these over-the-top superlative promises to the American people. But those are the people that he's lost. I mean, the people in the middle. I mean, if you look at every demographic, when you look at millennials, when you look at people that are lower, that are even non-educated white people, when you look at minorities, when you look at women, when you even look at seniors, he's negative with every demographic. So as him continuing to tout that he has the 100 above 90% support of the 32 to 37% of the voting public, that's not going to help him in a 2020 scenario.
That's right. Although after I guessed so wrong last year, I don't want to make any predictions about 2020 yet. But
well, you know what? I've heard other people say that, and we've said that on this show. But I submit to you that at the end of the day, all of the polls that were coming out were saying that Hillary Clinton had a high percentage of winning. The gentleman who runs 538, he said it was like a 70% chance that Hillary Clinton was going to win.
That's
so
right.
There was no poll that came out that said, that said Donald Trump had a 0 chance of winning. There was a small percentage of chance that he was going to win. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. So, I kind of grimace a little bit when I hear people in the media say, "Oh, we got it wrong." No, we didn't. I don't think we got it wrong. There was a
That's right.
Hillary Clinton had a high percentage of chance that she was going to win, but there was always a small chance that Donald Trump was going to win. And if everything else is true, as far as Russian collusion and the cross check and all of those other things, if all of those things are correct, then that was the small path through which he was able to win.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you raised that point, because I've made the same argument to people. In fact, well, I was there in the sense that on the night of the election, I was at WGN TV on air as the numbers were coming in, and prior to that, I saw that as Nate Cohn, who you mentioned, or Silver,
right? Nate Silver, 538.com.
538, yeah, exactly. He was one who, all the news editors were calling him and saying, "What are who's going to win?" He said, "Too close to call." And they say, "Well, what are the odds of Trump being able to cross that little gap and be able to win, to beat Hillary Clinton?" Oh, well, I'd say they're really high, like 75 to 25. Hillary's going to win. Well, on election day, as the night went on, at about 7, 8 o'clock, they started saying, "Well, it's more like 60-40." And then it was, "Well, it's 50-50 actually." And then, what was it, about 9 or 9:30, when they said, "It looks like Trump is ahead." And then maybe it was around 10 o'clock or so Chicago time, when they said that Trump had won. And it was in those 6 key states, swing states. They said Trump would have to win 5 out of those 6, and those include the states I just mentioned earlier. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Exactly.
Ohio. And we saw one by one he ran the table, and he actually won those states. And I think it was because the Republicans were energized. Democrats were not energized behind Hillary Clinton. They were divided between him and Bernie, et cetera. I think now in the long range, let me stick my neck out and say that you've got Democrats already showing themselves to be more energized than Republicans, even now in the Virginia and Alabama races. We saw this happen. And I think we're seeing it in the polls nationwide. So, I got to say, I don't want to jinx my own prediction, but I would say that Trump is going to have a very hard time. What's the old line about fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
Right. Clarence Page.
That was the line George W. Bush could never get that quite right.
Right. He would always say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, you can't fool me again.
There you go.
Clarence Page, it is such a pleasure. I can't tell you how much pride it fills us with to have you appear today with us on Humanity in the Headlines.
It's my pride to be on WVON, and let's do it again sometime.
We are definitely going to have you back, and we'll make sure that tell our listeners really quickly how they can find you and how they can follow you.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at CP Time. That's Clarence Page Time, a step ahead of the time, as well as Facebook, and of course the Chicago Tribune opinion section.
And also on MSNBC, whenever I know that you're going to be on the Chris Matthews show, I stop what I'm doing and tune in.
Yeah, and by the way, we're bringing the McLaughlin Group back.
Right, I remember that.
It's going to be on tomorrow at noon on DC's ABC station, and it's going to be on the web starting at 1 o'clock Eastern time, noon Chicago time.
We will be checking that out, Mr. Clarence Page. It is a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on Humanity in the Headlines.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.
There it is. As we promised you, a hot first half to discuss that book written by Mr. Michael Wolff, Fire and Fury. We're giving him yet more free advertising, but whatever, he earned it.
We just really quickly, we did have a comment. We want to make sure that we mention that.
Please.
And say it again, that yes, we have to remember that Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote. Absolutely.
By a bigly margin.
Again, a lot of those votes came from California. That notwithstanding, again, even if Trump was intellectually honest, he could have told himself, hey, most of those votes came from California. And by the time those votes came in, I had already won the Electoral College, so it doesn't matter. He could have just taken that road, but instead trying to put this voter fraud commission together, trying to fine 3 to 5 million illegals.
Fraud.
Right, now disbanded because, and they said that it was only disbanded because the Democratic states wouldn't
No.
cooperate, even though 34 of the 50 states in the union have Republican majority assembly, state senators. So if the Democratic states didn't cooperate, that shouldn't have mattered. But again, we could go off another hour just on that.
Exactly. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about these Obama era regulations and laws that are now being rolled back through the Trump administration. Joining us for this conversation will be Judge Anthony Swanigan. Thank you so much for listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We'll be right back. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. So, Dave, we got to wrap up the show with something strong here. Hot first segment, so we definitely got to keep the momentum going. Let's talk about this thing with what is Trump's obsession with rolling back, with eliminating anything that has the name Obama attached to it?
That's an excellent question. My gut response would be that the entire foundation of him making his transition from a private business individual into politics was really the birther movement. So, and he was able to galvanize and keep the 32 to 37% of individuals that are representative of his base, based on that antipathy towards President Obama. So I've got to believe that's so ingrained in how he made that transition into politics that it's probably just reflexive at this point. If he sees something that has Obama's name on it, he just has to do it, because that's where that takes him back to his foundation, to his roots, and how he actually made the transition into politics. That would be my guess.
See, I thought it was something more personal, because I thought it was, when Obama roasted him at White House Correspondents' Dinner that year. I'm pretty sure that had a lot to do with it, when he had to sit there and take them jokes that year. But I think that was 2011.
I don't know that someone would. I don't know that that's possible. Certainly, that would be a disproportionate response for him to go through the time and energy of running to become president of the United States.
I don't know. Them jokes are pretty good.
They were good. They were good.
Well, we got a lot to. On a serious note, we have a lot to discuss here. So let's talk about Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice, and they are rolling back now the protections for federal, for people to be able to sell marijuana and not be prosecuted federally. What does that mean for us? Well, don't even answer that. Let's bring our guest on to answer that question. Joining us right now, very qualified guest. We bring you the best here at Humanity in the Headlines, and we are very honored to have him. We have joining us Mr. Judge Anthony Swanigan. How are you today, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
We are excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. So if I could pose that question to you, I'm sure you've heard all about that with Jeff Sessions, and we know about Jeff Sessions' personal type of vendetta against marijuana as it stands. We're not here to promote marijuana use. Again, I don't know if you listened to the show earlier, but neither David or myself have ever smoked marijuana. To us, though, it just doesn't make any sense to have these very old draconian laws about marijuana. But what was your visceral response when you heard about what they were doing in the Justice Department and rolling back those protections?
Well, I think the interesting thing is there are a number of states. I live in Illinois, and Illinois is one of the states that is taking steps to decriminalize marijuana. And so this raises a conflict between federal law and state law. Now, there's one thing for the federal government to say that they'll continue to treat marijuana as a substance worth criminalizing in states that have no laws, but in states like Illinois and Colorado and California, that's raising a conflict between federal and state law. That conflict has yet to be resolved. We'll see how it works out in the courts. Generally speaking, federal law is supreme over state law. But then the flip side is, I guess, the interesting sort of take on this is that some of the people who would be arguing that federal law should override state law on this issue are some of the same people who would be saying that states' rights are going to prevail and states should get to do what they want. So I imagine that when federal prosecutor tries to push this in some state where the state law is different, we're going to see some interesting court activity. I wouldn't want to speculate on how that's going to turn out.
And I'm glad you said that. This is David, and you actually just encapsulated what my next question was going to be, because ultimately this is an argument between the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution and the 10th Amendment. And I guess my largest issue with Republicans is that they selectively flip-flop or vacillate between which ideology they're going to endorse or espouse depending upon whatever the issue is. Republicans and conservatives, generally speaking, when it comes to abortion, they want to say it's the Supremacy Clause, and we need to get the federal government to pass a law, and if the federal government passes a law, then it applies to everybody. They want to say when it comes to marijuana, because Jeff Sessions is in there, again, Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump have had innumerable times where they've endorsed states' rights. But now they want to come back because they have a personal ideology as it pertains to marijuana and say no, now on this issue we want to endorse the Supremacy Clause. So I guess as a judge, ultimately, which one is the one that we should be endorsing in 2017? Should it be the Supremacy Clause that says the federal government has the last say, or should we be leaving an issue like this up to the states?
Well, I guess if a case is filed in federal court and it argues the supremacy of federal law over state law, once again, things like this depend on how the cases are presented. I would imagine that a federal judge would be likely to consider the Supremacy Clause paramount. Knows whether or not there'll be any exceptions anybody could carve out an argument for, and I would be interested to see if that could be done. And I guess before we got to that, I would have to wonder whether like U.S. attorneys in individual locations, like the U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Illinois, will he be taking directives from the Justice Department to try to pursue marijuana prosecutions? I imagine they have other things that are paramount on their list of priorities. But I would be interested to see. I wouldn't want to bet on how it's going to come out, because it is an interesting conundrum with not a clear answer, I don't think.
Well, having said that, let me ask you this. And again, I try to, again, talking about in my personal life, there are things that I'm conservative about and there are things that I'm liberal about, but I try to be intellectually honest. So when I hear Republicans talking about the opioid addiction, and they say, we've got to do something to help these people because they're addicted. We've got people dying, and you've got police departments who have come out on the record and they tell their citizens, if you are in possession or addicted to opioids, come to the police because we're here to help you. Now, if these individuals who are addicted to opioids, they are in a vast majority of the cases, once they get to the point of addiction and abuse, they have obtained that drug illegally, either by some sort of illegal prescription, or they're buying it on the black market, and then it leads to heroin use, which is also illegal, and so forth and so on. So again, as a judge, if a case comes before you, you have what the law says, and then you have some discretion, and some of that discretion is based on what you personally bring to the bench. But how can we take the Republican Party and specifically the Trump administration seriously when they are saying to one group of people that we want to help you with your drug addiction because it's dangerous and it's a medical condition, but then they want to say to another demographic of people who are using marijuana, we want to put you in jail and prosecute you?
Yeah, I think it's a judge's job to subtract out of your analysis any of those political considerations. And so to the extent, I know there are judges who are personally conservative or personally liberal on those issues.
Of course.
And that's always going to be the case. I think what a judge has to do, though, is to say that when I am considering what an appropriate sentence is, or whether or not there's an alternative to a harsh prison sentence, whether there's a diversionary program, whether there's treatment or other alternatives, you have to make that available, and you have to employ those alternatives on an even-handed basis. And you can't let the political winds that are blowing make you decide that those who are indulging in drug A are deserving of those alternative treatments, whereas those who are indulging in drug B need to be locked up and the key thrown away. And so I think what a good judge brings to the bench is enough knowledge about the world to make sure that he or she treats whoever's before him even-handedly.
Answer, Your Honor. We thank you so much for your perspective on this matter. This is Atiba. Let me ask you this, and I just have to bring this point up because we promised we would kind of make the case for this today. But I'm looking at an article written in July of 2017, CNN Money. Colorado passes a milestone for pot revenue, and it cites here specifically that the state has earned over $500 million since they've legalized marijuana in 2014, and looks like 2014 they earned $76 million, and in 2016 they had earned $200 million in revenue just for the taxation. Doesn't that make? Can you imagine then if a state? Because I'm thinking about the population density of a Colorado compared to a California. If Colorado can make $200 million a year in tax revenue, what on earth would a state like California or Illinois or New York make? And when you compare that to the things that happen with marijuana use, people typically don't get addicted. They typically do. They're literally zero deaths from marijuana use. It's something that people pretty much use recreationally. Doesn't that alone make the case that this is something that we should be looking at?
Well, I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier. This is going to come down in a lot of instances, in states where the state wants to legalize use for recreational purposes. This is going to come down to some prosecutorial discretion. Now, it's one thing for the Justice Department to say, we still consider this to be a drug that we should prosecute use of. But it's another thing for the U.S. attorney in a particular area like Colorado, like California, like Illinois. It's a different thing for a local federal prosecutor to say, despite the factors you mentioned, despite all the revenue that the state gets from that, we're going to do what we can to shut that down in spite of what the state's residents and the state legislators and the state legal system wants. And so I think that no matter what gets said from the top down, there's going to be some local level analysis that maybe will put the brakes on any speed towards trying to shout down those state laws.
You know, I'm listening to you speak, and I'm listening to what you're saying about judges having that kind of discretion and how they should apply the law evenly. And I'm remembering in my personal life, and I think Tiba and I were talking about this in preparation for this particular story. And I'll just say it really quickly, where I had two experiences in close proximity where I had a traffic ticket in Westmont, which is a far west suburb of Chicago, and then I had another one in the city where I had to go downtown. And when I was in the traffic court in Westmont, there was about 25 so were, between 16 and 19 years old. They were all at a party. All of them had marijuana on them, and they went before a white judge. And some of them this was their second or third possession, but all of those kids just got a fine and they were dismissed and didn't have anything go on their record. Then I went to had a traffic incident in the city of Chicago where there was a 16 or 17-year-old African-American young kid that was going before a judge for his second possession of marijuana, and that judge gave him 1 year of probation. And I guess that's the underlying question, or that's the underlying issue when you start looking at the issue of how the politicians and people in our government decide to dole out which offense is going to be punished and prosecuted, and which offense we're going to give mercy and we're going to, give some discretion to. Am I wrong to be worried about? Should all of us be worried about that, or am I just overstating the case?
No, you're not. You're not overstating the case. I think that statement of the case is a confirmation of why good judges are important, because I would think that a good judge, now let's say that judge in Westmont was transported to your other situation where you were in the city of Chicago. If that judge who was lenient in Westmont was similarly lenient to the folks who came in front of him in Chicago, I would say fine and dandy. If the judge in Chicago who was harsh in Chicago was similarly harsh in Westmont, I would say, okay, that's okay too. And that's within the range of discretion that we allow judges to have. And I think there's no getting around that. The problem comes in exactly as you stated. If the same judge is going to treat one class of offenders harshly and another class of offenders leniently, then that's a problem. And I think if you're a good judge, number one, I think you are aware of the need to avoid that kind of disparity. And I think if you bring the right kind of broad-based background and experience to the bench, if you have experience with people and life, and if you can see who's who and what's what without prejudice, then I think you can be a good judge, and I think you can dispense justice in an even-handed way. And it's right for you to be concerned that is or is not happening.
Absolutely. Judge, we know you're pressed for time. We know you have some time constraints today. So I got one more question for you before we let you go. Are you aware of the situation down in Cartersville, Georgia, where there were roughly 70 people that were arrested at a house party for less than, I think, an ounce of marijuana?
I've seen the headlines and I've seen stories on the internet. I have to say I don't know details other than what's in the paragraph or two that I've read in a couple of stories.
Okay, well, that's essentially what happened. 70 people had been arrested. Many of the men, and I'm reading from The Intercept right now, many of the men and women who were arrested, they were fired from their jobs after they were left in jail for days on end. So I'm just kind of pointing out some of the consequences that happens when we have these types of things happen. But one, I'm trying to figure out, how on earth can 70 people be arrested for 1 ounce of cocaine? 1 ounce of marijuana. And so how does that even happen? And two, isn't that what this really is about? This war on marijuana is to be able to continue to arrest people for financial gain.
Well, I guess I can't speak to what goes on in Georgia. What I can speak to is, in my own background, I can freely admit, since the statute of limitations has run on me, if folks are getting arrested for being at a party where there was an ounce of marijuana, I personally could have been arrested a time or two or more in my life. And I think it would have been an appropriate thing for a judge, if I got arrested and I got dragged to the court, I would have hoped that it would have been appropriate for a judge to see my potential and to exercise his discretion in the opposite direction from the direction that the officer who arrested me exercised it. Now, I have no idea why it would have gone differently in Georgia than it would here. I hope it would be different here, and I would hope that the discretion exercised by a judge could maybe even out some of the discretion exercised by an arresting officer.
Judge Anthony Swanigan, we really appreciate you joining us today, and we this has been a really good conversation, and I hope that you will definitely come back and remain a friend of the show and of Humanity in the Headlines.
Oh, I've enjoyed it, and thanks for having me. I'm glad for the opportunity to have the conversation.
We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Oh.
We're gonna definitely have him back. It's really interesting to have him on as a judge and having this conversation, because really, when you start to think about Donald Trump, the one thing that he has done in his first year as president is that he has appointed more federal judges than any other president in his first year, and he's appointed 12 of them, and those people have lifetime appointments.
Right.
That's the danger of having a Donald Trump
Yep.
in the White House, because he's appointing people based on their how they're ingratiating themselves to him and how they're trying to get to the front of the line.
People that have never even tried a case.
People who have never tried a case are sitting on the federal bench with a lifetime appointment
And a lifetime check.
And a lifetime check.
And a lifetime pension.
So, again, we as citizens, we need to it's really important to keep those things in mind. I'll finish by saying this, that Donald Trump, one of the you could say brilliant things, or one of the smart things that he did in running for president, is that he got the conservative base out by promising them, hey, I'm going to put this kind of judge on the bench.
He did.
That brought people out. And our side, people who are progressives, we should have had that should have been just as important to us. Had we held that the potential of Donald Trump being able to appoint people to the federal bench and to the Supreme Court, if we had held that issue as importantly as the right had, perhaps I'm sure that the election would have turned out differently.
But see, here's the thing, and because I think we still got a minute or two left. That's an interesting point that you raised, and I agree with you. The problem with that is that on the left, center, even center left, we cannot unabashedly or unapologetically espouse what we'd like to do, especially from the judgeship, because they're able to say we're going to get a judge that's going to get rid of Roe versus Wade. They can say that with a straight face and not be a problem. If we do the same thing with something that's a leftist issue, then again, you rarely see that. We're not able to voice what we want to do strongly and apologetically and full-throatedly, because those ideologies get shot down.
I understand, and I agree with you. But even Donald Trump, he was at Camp David today, and he had some people with him. And Mitch McConnell spoke, and Mitch McConnell said that we are going to enact laws to make this a center-right nation. So he's telling you you right there what their agenda is. They are going to enact laws that are center right. And we on the left, you still have people on the left today that are still having the Hillary Bernie argument. That's not important. What we have a madman at 1600 Pennsylvania, and if we can't galvanize around anything, we need to galvanize around the fact that leaving Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and Donald Trump in office is a detriment to the things that we do espouse. Whether or not, to your point, we have different priorities. If you poll 10 progressives, they might tell you 10 different things that are their number one issue, but none of those issues are going to be addressed as long as we allow these sycophantic, unpatriotic, party first, country second, party first, God second, country last individuals in power.
And that goes back to voting, which is so utterly important this week. And this is our last note. Was that North Carolina that we had that one? It came down to one vote.
Came down to one vote, and then they put the names in a bowl and picked out the name. And of course, I had been saying all along, if they pull some names out of bowl, it's going to be the Republican.
Right.
And lo and behold, the Republican name got pulled.
And this shifted power in this particular Congress. And again, it came down to one vote. But like I said on Facebook, the Republicans won that when they had their judges in place.
That is correct.
So, and that goes back to your earlier point.
That is correct.
We thank you so much for joining us on Humanity in the Headlines today. It's been wonderful being back. Please join us next week. We are back now every week, 1 o'clock Central Standard Time. We thank our producer, Mr. Breon Jones. We thank Earl Winfrey for this wonderful platform. We will see you next week on Humanity in the Headlines. Take care.